T-minus 3, 2, 1, 0.
Hey folks, how you doing? Welcome to another episode of the Launch Sequence Podcast. I'm your host, Space Tomato, and I'm gonna let you in on a little secret. Here in this podcast, we talk about space stuff. Today, we've got a new spaceship launched in Star Citizen. It's an alien spaceship, it's a new manufacturer, and it's properly strange. So I brought in one of the best ship folks to talk about in the Star Citizen community, good old YouTuber and friend, returning to the Launch Sequence Podcast, Farrister. Welcome in, buddy. How you doing today?
Thank you. I'm well. Good afternoon, morning, evening, depending on when you're watching, to all humans and Xi'an tuning in for this one.
Yeah, and enjoy your back scratchers if you are Xi'an. Heard those are nice. How are you doing, my friend?
I've been very, very excited to hear all of the things that we might expect through IAE 2953, and you and I are here today on launch day with some of the details of one of those first exciting things.
Yeah, can we, before we get into it, because a lot of people have joined Star Citizen in the last year and 2 years, some people sometimes miss these events. IAE is another one of these kind of large events throughout the year, and I figure let's talk about it a little bit, just give people a bit of background for what it is. Would you say it's the biggest event Star Citizen has of the year?
I think for me, it's probably between that and the Invictus launch week, which happens around May. But I think the thing about the Intergalactic Aerospace Expo is it ties very neatly into other sales that are going on in other companies. So like the big Black Friday fever type season. And this is a big in-game event that coincides with that.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Is some people see this as their Black Friday sale, and I didn't even think of it that way. I don't know if that's why they started it because of the timing. I know that they have stuff around this time of year because of the different anniversaries they have, but it is very perfectly timed. It's also horribly timed, as like I'm trying to cover this event and I'm also trying to fly across the country to see my family for Thanksgiving. So pour one out for like Americans who are trying to get Star Citizen stuff done along with family stuff.
For sure.
So, what are you looking forward to during IAE this year? We've got a few different ships, new ships being announced. We got a Storm variant, Argo SRV obviously is coming, the Crusader C1, and this new Gatac Syulen we'll talk about today. Any favorites that you're looking forward to, though?
I mean, a lot of those. So I've been fortunate to fly a bit of C1 in the PTU, and I love it, so I'm looking forward to the opportunity to fly some more of that. I haven't yet flown the Argo SOV, so I'm looking forward to flying that. But also, I think having all of the ships flyable in Star Citizen on the expo floor sometimes prompts you to revisit ships that you've not flown for a while. And so I'm looking forward to just picking up a couple and renting some things and traveling down memory lane and seeing how they're performing now.
Yeah, that's actually a really good point, and kind of a good point for anybody who's considering Star Citizen. Is the best way to experience it is not to buy in if you're on the fence, but to go to every free fly, because you'll be able to understand kind of how the game is changing over the course of the year, over the course of several years, and you don't have to pay anything. You get to experience all this. And like Farrister is saying, during things like the IAE, you can basically fly any ship. So we'll be doing a lot of events in our own organization where like we want to do stuff that maybe requires a certain type of ship or takes advantage of everyone having one particular ship. And I think this is a great opportunity for people to just kind of experiment with Star Citizen.
Absolutely agreed. And also for people that are thinking about what's the next ship that I might get, whether that is an upgrade with your wallet or even just trying to decide what to put your Alpha UEC in-game against next.
Mm-hmm.
Like, these events are fantastic to actually just go and try it, fly it for 48 hours, see what you like about it, see what you don't, and then decide, is that something that I'm interested in?
Yeah. And this one is taking place at New Babbage this year. Do you think next year they'll... you think they'll put it in Pyro?
Oh, I hope not. The new Babbage Tobin Expo Hall is so classy. This is actually the third year that the IAE has been at the new Babbage Expo Hall, and like I just like that. I'm a big fan of New Babbage. I'm a big fan of Microtech anyway, so it feels like it's all coming home.
To be honest, Microtech feels like the most approachable planet in the system. Funny being a frozen ball, but like Hurston is just so dirty and foggy, and like it doesn't really invite you that much. But Microtech is like, it has land and it's got trees, which is nice. So yeah, I like hosting stuff there and doing things on Microtech.
For sure.
So actually, before we continue, I've never asked you this, but what are the ships that you're most interested in? What is your future gameplay that you're gearing up your quote unquote fleet for, I guess?
Well, you and I share, I think, quite similar aspirations here, and it's multi-crew and like working together as a crew on some of the big ships that excites me. And I often read about people talking about it, and they're saying nobody wants to be the person in the engineer station at the back of the ship. And I was like, I do. That's me. That's what I want to do. So I've kind of built up my ships and my fleet around that. I have 3 ships. The first is the Ares Inferno Starfighter. That is my fighter. It's not the most efficient, it's not the most meta ship, but I love it. I love the way it flies. And for me, doing fighter type stuff, that works great for me. That's my solo ship.
Okay.
I have a middle-sized ship, which is the Crusader M2 Hercules, and that's kind of my crossover ship. So I can fly that solo and do some cargo hauling or whatever else with it. There's room on board for ground vehicles. It works quite naturally for that. But also, if I've got 1 or 2 friends with me, there is room on board for them. So I think that's a ship that I would fly a mix of either by myself or with 1 or 2 friends. And then I have the big ship for the Org gameplay, which is the Aegis Javelin Destroyer, which I'm really excited about that. 1 or 2 nights a week, I'll just arrange for a big group of friends to get together, and we will go out and we will like multi-crew that. Everybody's going to be like learning where to get around. We're going to have engineers. We're going to have people in the turrets, people firing the torpedoes. And I'm really excited for that kind of multi-crew, almost raid-style gameplay. So those are my 3 ships in my core fleet.
It's a good spread, man. You hit all the sizes there. I can't wait to see how that changes over time. I feel like we're all kind of, every year they're introducing a new ship, and it kind of makes people reconsider how they want to play the game. But the Javelin, it's going to be... Yeah, that's going to be interesting to see how that turns out.
I think so. And I've kind of had this fleet fairly static for a few years because I've identified ships at the size point. So a solo ship, a solo/multi-crew, and a multi-crew. And I will have a lot more ships, but I will buy them all in-game. For me, those 3 give me the tools that I've got from day one to play the game, and then I'll unlock the rest with credits.
Sure. Well, we are all here to talk about a particular ship today. The Gatac Syulen has released, it is a alien starter ship, they describe it, but as a premium starter ship. And it comes in kind of competing sort of in the same realm as like the Avenger Titan and the Nomad. What do you think of it?
Well, wow. I mean, it's got the looks, and I think we'll kind of get into what sits behind that. But before I kind of go into anything else, one of the things I really like about the alien ships is that they're very, very exotic. They're not like anything that you've seen from other more mainstream manufacturers, and the Syulen definitely has those looks. I should probably qualify as well. I haven't yet had a chance to fly this ship in game, so I'm judging on the videos and the things that they've shown us. I'm looking forward to getting my hands on it and giving it a test flight, but this is all kind of just from the materials that they've published.
Yeah,
I think it's very interesting that it's a starter ship. I watched your React video to that first impression of it, and I think you were quite surprised it was a starter ship as well.
yeah. When they said that, I was like, "What is this?" Because you're looking at the size of the thing, and you're like, "Man, this is $100-$120 easy." Now, that's not how we should judge spaceships. The real life price of these things is not indicative of how useful they might be to you or your gameplay, but it makes them relative to other things. And when I looked at this and I saw the size, I was like, that's gonna be up there. I don't know how that qualifies as a starter, but they're pricing it around what, $80, $85 full price?
Yeah, I think the full price is 85, but the initial launch has like a 15% discount. I should say as well, the 85 is as a starter pack rather than as standalone.
Right, which is not bad. I mean, this is a lot of ship for that, plus Star Citizen included. I wouldn't say it's everything you need though, but the looks, this ship is here, you get this ship because of the looks, right? Like you're not just kind of throwing this up in a list of general ships and you're like, well, they all have the same specs. I don't know which one. I feel like if somebody's targeting this ship, it's because it flies vertically. It's an alien manufacturer. It's got those different materials. It's a very strong statement in terms of the design, so much more than the philosophy.
Definitely. And the design is there. Like, you get the hover stairs, the pop-out weapon rack. It's across 3 different floors with, like, a habitation deck and, like, rocks in the walls and, you know, that floating chair up to the cockpit. There was a lot of really cool stuff about the design of this ship.
Yeah. How would you describe, like, if you had to describe this to somebody and you didn't have a picture to show them? I'm looking at the trailer and I'm like, how do you describe this? It's like a hulking solid jellyfish. I don't know.
Yeah, I think that works. Like a flying, like, pyramid tripod, maybe?
It's a very interesting design. What do you think? What do you think of the vertical stance of it? That you're basically sitting in it like an old school space shuttle, or like how we launch right now.
Yeah, so I've got 2 key thoughts on that. So the first is it's very different from a lot of the ships we've got in game right now, and I think that's very welcome. One of the nice things about the alien manufacturer is that they introduce something that's weird, that's different, that's niche, and I really like that that is in the game. My other thought on this is I'm not sure I would have chosen to put that on a starter ship. So these starter ships tend to be about the people that are first coming into the game, experiencing Star Citizen for the first time. And whilst the Syulen is like a really premium, niche, very design-focused ship, it feels like more like an advanced pilot's ship. You need to actually understand quite a lot to be able to fly it and fly it well. And that, for me, doesn't quite sit with starter ship. I think it's great potentially for players who already have a cheap starter package now, don't mind spending a little bit more to upgrade their starter package to this, but have the knowledge to back that up. But I don't know how new player friendly it will be.
Yeah, that's a very good point, and something you said you haven't flown it in game. I haven't either, but I was on Inforunners earlier today, and we were doing kind of an in-game review of it, and I can say it is not easy. It's confusing because, first of all, we don't have the most important part of this ship, which is a 3D holographic display for landing, something that we had back before 3.0, and that they've talked about doing, but honestly, I was surprised didn't show up at CitizenCon. And that means you basically have to switch to third person to use this ship. But when you do that, you're in a gravity well, right? So you're sitting on your back, and the camera's controls are assuming you're sitting on your back looking forward. But when you're sitting in this ship, because it launches from your back, you're technically going to be looking down, right? When you go to the third person view, in order to see where you're going to get out of a hangar, you have to look down and press down to go out of the hangar. So for a new player, you have to wrap your mind around that while using the third person camera. And then on top of that, when you're holding Z and you're rotating the third person camera with your mouse, everything is off because you're rotating based on the idea that you're moving down. You're rotating the camera based on the idea you're moving forward, and the game is saying you're moving down. So like when you move your mouse to the right, you don't actually move right. You kind of rotate around the ship. It's all very difficult because of this new orientation, and you can tell that the game and the flight model and the systems behind it haven't been made for that yet. This is a ship coming kind of before that preparation, which happens in Star Citizen.
And I think that's what's going to make this ship really interesting to experienced pilots. This is a new challenge. You get to really set your mind to something different and train your mind to do something different. And it's going to be very maneuverable as well. Certainly by all of the stuff that I'm hearing, all the stuff that I'm seeing, it looks like it's going to be a real pilot's ship. So if you've got the dream of being in the top 1% of pilots, do you know what? This could be a really fun ship. And that, for me, is a place of interest in its own right? That is a good thing for the ship to exist. The thing that I'm struggling with is when you label that starter ship. This is your first ship in Star Citizen, and like that is a steep learning curve, surely.
Yeah, that's I think you really nail the point there. And they call it an advanced starter. So like, I would tell someone, I would tell someone don't get a Hull A, right, as your starter ship. And I think the Hull A is more expensive than this. I would tell them get that as your second ship. That's something that you're really into, and that's the direction you want to move in is cargo hauling. This feels kind of like, and I know people will disagree with this, but it feels like the Hull A of exotic ships, like you get your basic ship as your starter, 45, 50 bucks, 30 bucks, whatever it is. And then you realize, oh, I really like spaceships, but I want something that's like just out there. Because this is a solid ship, I think. If you took away the vertical landing and the alien design and everything, I think it's solid. It's got amenities, it's got storage, it's got a solid amount of thrusters, it's got pretty solid weaponry, and it's got multiple decks and a bed. So like overall, this thing sits in a solid place as like a first or second ship, but because of that extreme design, like you're saying, it really does feel like a second ship.
Or an alternative starter ship for somebody who already knows how to play the game. So there are a lot of people out there that got the cheapest game package, unlock stuff in game, and for those people, especially at this discount price, this might be an appealing upgrade to their existing game package to say, actually, this could be fun. Like you say, there is a lot of stuff that comes with a ship. Decent weapons, supposedly decent maneuverability. You've got some room for boxes around the outside. You've got a back scratcher. None of the other Star Citizen starter ships have that.
Nope.
So for those people, for those existing players who maybe want to just eke a little bit more value out of their initial package, this could be a really interesting like sidestep upgrade option. But for a new player, like you'd have to be pretty confident in your own skills of being able to pick this up quite quickly, or spend a lot of time in Arena Commander before you hit the verse, I think. So it's just the starter ship that had me curious.
Speaking of like packages and how people join in and what starter package they buy, just kind of out of left field, do you think that they should be offering no ship starter packages for this game? Because we just talked about, there are a lot of people who want to just be crew. For those who would understand completely that they won't be getting a spaceship, do you think that that's something that should be offered on the store?
I think it's a tough one because, like, on the one hand, I can see exactly where you're coming from. And for the people that just want to be crew, that could be a really good, accessible option to get into the game. I think the challenge will be twofold. I think number one would be making sure that people understood you get the game access, but you're not going to be able to do very much at all without relying on somebody else. Because there'll be people that will go, hey, Star Citizen looks cool. What's the cheapest option for me to get in and play? It's this one. They pay the money, they get in the game, they can't do anything because they're reliant on someone else and then feel a bit aggrieved. So you'd have to get the messaging right on that one.
Yep.
I guess the second element is I'm really excited for multi-crew. I've talked through the ships that I have, and the first of those is a solo ship, because I also understand that there will be times when it is just not practical to be able to find a crew to join. And I know that lots of content creators have disproved that theory by, just like saying, I'm just going to crew up and very quickly finding a crew. But I don't know how easy or difficult that might be to do in the future, especially as potentially citizens are spread out over a wider area. So I think it's a tough one. You'd have to make sure the experience was good for such packages if they were introduced.
Yeah, they're definitely going to have to make the experience easier before they can do that. Okay, sorry. That's a really interesting approach that I think would kind of go to show how many people maybe don't really care to fly ships. Because a lot of people, I think, join this game because they like space, less so than like space flight simulators. And I think that would be an olive branch for them.
And it might be, but equally, the cheapest starter packages have a ship, and they would let you get from A to B. If you have an Aurora MR and somebody rocks up and says, "Hi, I'm flying my Idris and I'm looking for a crew. Would you like to come aboard this massive ship and give it a go?" For that sort of player, those opportunities would still be there, but they'd also potentially have a ship to fall back on that they could then say, right, well, I need to get back to Microtech to visit the Expo Center. I've got my ship to do that without relying on somebody to pick me up. So the cheapest starter packages might still give that flexibility. And there are a lot of players out there that just bought the cheapest starter packages and have worked up to an 890 jump from there. So it's definitely feasible to do.
Yeah, definitely. Now, here's a new question that I think I'm going to start asking for all ships, because this is, as we keep going throughout the game's development, more things come online that I think make certain ships mean more or less in the same situation over time. One of those things is, something that it's a little thing that they've been talking about occasionally. I think they just started bringing it up this year. You might not have heard about it yet. It's a little bit of a low-key addition, but it's called Pyro. And it's going to be a lot more dangerous. Obviously, you'll have different reasons to want different types of ships. For instance, the C1 does not seem like a pyro ship. You don't have a turret on the back. It's not going to be fun. How about this, though? This thing's got decent weaponry, and I mean, I think it's got okay shields. I actually don't know how the shields or armor are. Is this the kind of ship that you would suggest for somebody who is looking to live maybe a more dangerous lifestyle?
So I think any of the ships potentially could be feasible for somebody looking to live a more dangerous lifestyle, but you've got to have the skills to back up that dangerous lifestyle. So I'm sure there'll be C1 pilots out there who'll be like, yep, pyro, no problem, got it. Equally, there'll be C1 pilots out there that go, rather not, I'm staying in Stanton.
Right.
I think for me, what makes the Syulen interesting for pyro is something that is hidden within the stats at the moment, which is the quantum fuel stores. This thing has considerable quantum fuel stores, something like 3 to 4 times what you get on a Nomad, which implies that the range of this ship is potentially going to be a lot higher than some of the other starter ships. Now, that is all subject to balancing, right? All of these stats could change. But I think that is going to be one of the key factors in Pyro, which is a much bigger system than Stanton. A lot of the starter ships have relatively small fuel tanks, and it's quite common to see if you're in a tiny little starter ship that you're going to have to stop from A to B to C to fuel up as you go along.
Yeah.
Potentially with the Syulen, you could be quantuming quite long distances, and that could be a unique use case for this ship.
Okay. Would you say that puts it in exploration territory? I don't know what kind of scanning this thing, if it has a radar or what. I know that's it's a loaded question. It's more speculation wise for you.
Because I just watched the Inside Star Citizen that said this isn't necessarily like the exploration ship, but it could kind of do that, but it's not necessarily the one you'd pick. So like maybe. I guess it depends on what you mean by exploration, because for me there's two parts to that. There's the exploration gameplay loop, which is going to be like the scanning and the finding stuff and the mapping stuff, all that stuff we saw at CitizenCon. But then there's the exploration in the sense of I just want to see cool stuff. Like I want to visit different planets and visit different space stations and just see the sights. And the second part of that, like potentially the ship could be great for something like that. You've got your bed on board, you've got your back scratcher to keep yourself comfortable, you've got the quantum fuel stores to make it. Like if you just want to go out and see the sights and you like the look of the ship and you like the fact that it flies differently to everything else, like maybe.
I'd say that the second thing you described, I'd call touring, and I'd say is part of exploration. But I think when I generally think of exploration, I guess instead of trying to name a gameplay type, I would just assume the things you need for exploration are an inventory, right? A place to store stuff that you found, a scanning suite to find things, decent distance, or the ability to accrue new fuel so that you can get out to places where other ships can't go, and living quarters, So besides those things, I think you can specialize for exploration. But definitely when it comes to like something like touring, if you wanted to have a ship that could be used to go and just see pretty sights and stuff, I'd be wary of a one-person ship, since in order to make money with exploration, you'd probably have to take somebody else to do that kind of thing. And unless you're willing to just kind of sink money into it, this ship doesn't look like it's going to have too many great viewpoints for a passenger. So I guess it always depends on really what you're doing with that exploration, like you said. But if it's got a good range and it can carry some boxes, I don't see why not.
It looks to have a good range and can carry some boxes. So
yeah, there you go. Well, in Pyro, I also think that obviously we've seen the way that people act in Pyro right now before it actually matters, but I think that place is going to be more civilized than people are assuming based on this early preview channel. What did you think of how that was all handled?
I mean, I don't know. Like, there are a lot of people that get very worked up around like PVE versus PvP. They're both a part of the game, and I kind of accept that you need to cater for both groups of players. For me, Pyro is supposed to be more lawless than Stanton, so I wouldn't be surprised if that kind of was where things start ending up once both are introduced. That said, for me, my personal experience of Pyro, I got attacked by players a couple of times. I flew away. I didn't want to fight them, so I left. And I didn't really have issues outside of that. So,
Nice. So they didn't follow you around or anything?
well, I couldn't. I flew away.
No. Well, I don't know, man. Sometimes they are dedicated. I didn't have too many.
I think people focus a lot on dogfighting skill, but I think there's something to be said of a skill of disengaging from a fight as well,
Oh, definitely.
and being able to withdraw. So for me, that's a skill I have invested my time in. I'm less interested in the dogfighting. I have nothing to prove against another person. It just doesn't interest me. But I'm quite happy to finesse my skills at just getting out of there and choosing not to fight if I don't want to fight.
Yeah, that's fair. Let's get back to the Syulen. So we've got a lineup of starter ships that I think are pretty effective at this point. And this kind of falls into the category. We already talked about it. It's near the Avenger Titan, the Nomad. They've always also mentioned the Reliant. There's a progression that you can take through starter ships. Do you think this fits into any sort of natural progression you can see? Like, would you suggest this be something somebody picks up from an Aurora or something like that?
Probably not. And I'll qualify that. So for me, the starter ships are the first ship that you have in game. They're your foundation, and you use that to either decide and determine what to move on to next, or you use that as your kind of like baseline. So for me, you wouldn't necessarily be best placed moving from one starter ship to another starter ship. For me, the starter ships are more like you earn your money and then you go into your first gameplay loop and perhaps have a more dedicated ship to a gameplay loop. So you like dogfighting. I wouldn't necessarily move from a starter ship to another starter ship. I'd move from a starter ship to a light fighter or a medium fighter or one of the more accessible fighter ships. If you like mining, I'd move to either a prospector as your first buy in game, or maybe, something that can carry a rock mining rover and taking that out. So for me, the starter ship is more like this is where you start and then you branch out into the stuff that you're interested in. There is potentially a role for the Syulen within that, because I think this is going to be one of the faster starter ships. So for people that perhaps are interested in more the flight mechanics side of things, maybe they're interested in getting a little bit more experience with racing. I haven't tried the ship with racing, but it certainly seems very, very maneuverable, and that could be interesting for some of the tighter tracks. Then perhaps this could be interesting, but I think for most players, like, it doesn't follow a neat progression line. You wouldn't get something radically different in combat or mining or trading or anything else than you would for the other starter ships. It's more the unique flight style and the unique design style.
Yeah, like we said earlier, you're picking this ship for the design. But we also then said that this was more a second ship than a first. So like if this is something that maybe somebody should take as their starter ship, but it's also a ship that's rather polarizing that you might not want to take as your first ship, it's fitting a very niche position, would you say?
Absolutely, I would say, which is why I'm surprised it's a starter ship. If this has been slightly tweaked and badged up as like a racing ship from Gatac or something like that, I could absolutely see a role for like a fast racing ship that just flies differently to anything else. It's its own gameplay loop. It's got its own niche within that. I think the challenge is just this is potentially quite a difficult ship to master. And then you throw that in with the word starter, it just doesn't quite fit for me.
Yeah. Do you think that's why now we all have seen alien ships come out before and we know the prices that they sit at? They're pretty inflated. Do you think this ship loses the alien tax because maybe it is so niche that they thought maybe people wouldn't be interested in jumping on it?
I think so. And And I'm glad to see that, because honestly, when I saw the ship before I saw the price, I thought this was going to be very expensive, and I thought that was going to eliminate any potential use case. I think actually the way they've priced it, especially with this early adopter kind of reduction in price, it does make it accessible. As long as people know what they're getting into and confident, it could be interesting. You know, for a player, like I say, who has a starter pack right now, who knows they just want to start the game with one ship, but they've got the experience behind them, this could be a really interesting and unique option. And let's not forget, people do make choices that might not be the meta choice or the most efficient choice in favor of like having something cool. And this is cool. So maybe there is a role for me. That my gut feel is that this is probably more interesting to existing players than for people who don't yet have a Star Citizen game package.
Yeah. Interesting that they're angling it as a starter. And I wonder if that's more for marketing than anything.
For sure.
You think it's going to sell a lot still?
I don't know. It'll be interesting to see. I don't imagine it would sell a lot to new players. I certainly hope it wouldn't, because potentially that's quite steep. But it was quite interesting. The Q&A was recently released at the time that we're recording this, and we were reading through it. And one of the comparator ships that they use for this is, they say, it's kind of in the same area as the Nomad. In the regular pricing of the ship, it's within $10 of the Nomad. But compared to the specs of the Nomad has so much more. The Nomad has 24 SCU of cargo compared to the 6 SCU on the Syulen. The Nomad has 3 size 1 shield generators versus the 2 on the Syulen. And I appreciate all of this stuff can change, but the Nomad feels a lot more versatile as a starter ship, which, as one of the more expensive starter ships, like, there's a value in that, because do you know what? You can put a rock mining rover on the back, and you can do a bit of combat, you can do a bit of trading, you can try lots of different stuff. That's more limited on the Syulen than the Nomad. So to say it's in the same area, it doesn't quite sit right with me.
Well, again, it's kind of like trading that cargo for the design. If you want a cargo ship, you go with the Nomad. If you want a better design, you go with the Syulen. And in my opinion, I kind of like the fact that this is more like a byproduct, but I like the fact that it makes you go back to another ship like the Nomad and be like, see, now this makes the Nomad make more sense. You know, you get these 2 ships that are similar price, similar size, and you might market them to a similar person, but now you can emphatically say, if you really want more cargo, get a Nomad. And then you can go even deeper down into that, and maybe they haven't released the ship yet, but then you can say, well, the Nomad also has this other competitor that carries the same amount of cargo, but it has a shielded cargo room. And like, that ability to keep on cornering people deeper and deeper into a specific ship is cool. But there's also doing it too much. And I think we've hit on this point multiple times today, but it sounds like you're saying that there isn't at least right now, an obvious functional reason that this ship would be chosen over its competitors.
Well, the bit that I'm struggling with is I think there is. This is a distinct ship. It is different. It will fly differently. You'll potentially be very maneuverable, and it will be a cool environment. For me, that is enough of a differentiator to say this is worth exploring. I think my nervousness is more around the starter ship badge and how accessible will this be to new players versus, for example, an Aurora. Anybody that's flown an Aurora will know they're really easy to fly. Like, it's not complicated at all. It's quite forgiving. Same with the Mustang series. Like, for a new player picking things up, and the learning curve for Star Citizen is like up there in itself. Like, you don't want to also be like fighting, how do I control the ship? And that's probably my nervousness about the Syulen. I think for an existing or an experienced player, this is a really interesting and compelling option. It's just not necessarily for a new player, in my opinion.
I can agree with you there. I'm excited to see how this combo of like tons of missiles, some pretty solid weaponry, and the maneuvering thrusters, tons of maneuvering thrusters. I'm interested in seeing how that makes this ship become useful to certain types of players. Any more thoughts on the Syulen, I also want to talk a little bit about the other alien ships that we might see and the other ships coming to IAE that we know about. But yeah, any last thoughts on that one?
I think it's really cool, and I'm really glad to see it. Like, I don't want to come across as negative for this ship because I loved the coverage of it. It was just the word starter ship that raised an eyebrow. Like, it looks like it's going to be maneuverable. It looks like it's going to be super fun to fly. It's unique. It's stylish. Any existing player out there that is thinking of picking this ship up and is comfortable to spend the money to do that, do you know what? I'm really jealous. I can see the value in that. So hopefully, like, my nervousness about the starship badge doesn't come off about as nervousness about the Syulen, because I think it's great.
I think we nailed that. I think we circled it for a while, and there are obviously criticisms and pros and cons of this ship when you don't view it as a starter ship. But yeah, I think most of the conversation comes around this being referred to as a starter, and like, a starter for who is a big question. But another alien ship that we have coming up is the Santok Yai, and we've been waiting for this one a lot longer than the gosh, I keep thinking Raylan, the Syulen. What do you think of the Santok Yai?
I mean, it looks awesome, doesn't it? You know, it's kind of that sweet spot in the fighter space where it looks like it's going to be really fast. Certainly the specs that are currently on the page say it's going to be fairly fast. You get the relatively heavy armament for the fighter craft. You get the size 2 shield. And yes, it's expensive and you pay the alien tax, but it looks like a really interesting and compelling fighter. I think when you couple that with potentially when we see the flight model changes with master modes, it could be a really interesting ship. And I think it might fight quite differently from some of the others. So I'm very interested to be able to fly the Santok Yai.
Yeah, I've been thinking that I would really love for them to do a sort of master modes presentation where they show us the difference between like a Kartual or a Santok Yai and a Gladius and a Super Hornet or something. Like, give us a full-on in-game demo of how much you're actually going to differentiate these ships, because that's probably the biggest selling point of the Santok Yai, right, is its thrust capabilities.
And its weird thrust capabilities versus just here's the engines at the back.
For anybody who doesn't know the ship, it looks like a giant grasshopper with thrusters on it, and they are omnidirectional. So instead of using maneuvering thrusters, which are weaker to do your strafes and your up and down, you're using your main thrusters, which means you have full thrust in all directions, much, especially with master modes, going to be much more noticeable than other traditional fighters. But you're not much of a dogfighter, right? So you're not probably watching this ship too much.
No, I mean, I'm not a PvP dogfighter, so I don't get my kicks out of fighting other people. But you know, I love fighting as much as the next person. I've got plenty of hours in Arena Commander, so I will definitely try the Santok Yai. I tried the Kartual a few years back and loved that as well. So I think it's interesting.
It's a good looking ship from what they've shown us. Anything particular about that ship that I don't think it's coming from 322 or until 322, so we won't see it in game. But there's anything particular in that ship you want to call out before we move on to the next?
I think we've called out the main thing. The maneuverability sounds the most exciting.
Yeah, and it's a one-person ship, right? One-person medium fighter.
Yep.
Yeah. So that's again, it's another choice to choose as you're progressing through all the ships, but it's a very unique and niche ship. It's a omnidirectional alien-made medium-sized dogfighter, and you know, most of us who are doing our mining and our medical missions aren't going to need that kind of stuff. So on to the next one. I think another ship that we are getting, I think it released today, actually. I think they released all of the other ships today, but the Spirit C1 from Crusader is probably my new daily driver. Have you gotten to fly it, experience it, see it?
I have. I've flown a bit in the PTU, and I'm hoping to revisit now on live. I really like it. It's easy to fly. It's stylish. It's Crusader. It's obviously stylish.
Yeah.
Since they've upped the cargo that fits in the back, it's kind of at a sensible point in terms of what it can do. It kind of sits quite neatly as an alternative to a cutlass or a freelancer. And yeah, I'm looking forward to getting some more hours behind the wheel. I think it's definitely going to be a ship review for me to pull together. I really like it. The only slight thing that I would say is anybody that's flown a Mercury Star Runner knows that getting to the cockpit can be a little bit awkward in that ship. And I think perhaps there was a missed opportunity for the Spirit there, but even so, it's a nice ship to fly, isn't it?
It's better. You still got 2 doors to get through. I guess if you count the back doors, you got 4 doors to get through to get to your to the cockpit. But it's at least faster than the MSR, which I would expect. It's a smaller ship. But yeah, the doors in Crusader tend to be a thing. They do what doors do. They block you. Just more than you would like. I also am really liking the C1. I think, going back to what I said about the Syulen is like the C1, you're taking a step into the C1 because of the design. It's as simple as that, and I think that should be part of what people consider when they're getting their ships and getting into Star Citizen. Like at the end of the day, you might want to be the most powerful or carry the most cargo, but like get the ship that you like, that makes you feel cool, that you think looks cool. And I think that the Spirit C1 has some disadvantages of it at the size that it's in, but like it looks so good that I don't care. I want my Tyrion-made Normandy and Star Citizen,
I absolutely agree. I think there's a lot to be said for buying the ship that resonates with you. And you want the ships to be competitive enough and you want them to have trade-offs against each other. For me, I think the C1 Spirit is kind of okay in that regard. It might not be the best at XYZ, but it's there or thereabouts. It's got the looks. And I think the other thing that I'll be really interested to see is as we see more atmospheric flight mechanics come into play, how much is that sleek lifting body going to be a real positive compared to, for example, flying the Cutlass, which I'm not sure will be as sleek in atmospheric flight.
Yeah, the shape of the ship looks so good. I can't get over it. I mean, I like the MSR, but that changed from concept to release. I've never been crazy about the Starlifter. I think it's a cool design. The Genesis looks good in pictures, but I don't know how that's going to be in game. But this thing from concept to in game is almost exact, and I love it. It looks so good. The 64 SCU of storage, I think, is a pretty solid. Like you said, it's above the Cutlass, right, but below the Freelancer Max.
Oh, way below the Freelancer Max. I think the Max is about 120.
Is it more than the regular Freelancer or less?
I think it's about the same.
Okay.
I'm loading this up now to check. I think it's about the same.
All right. And I guess the big complaint most people have about the ship and the ship series in general is the wings are they don't have interior space. It doesn't mean they're unused, but they don't have like that obviously useful space that we're looking for. Is that a reasonable trade-off in your opinion? You think it's a little bit too much?
No, I'm fine with it because I think as things develop, the wings will become useful in ways other than storage space. I think there will be utility in how the wings will make the ship easier to fly. It's not there at the moment, but I think in the future that will be a massive positive.
And in order to do that, they're going to have to hurt other people's flying behaviors. They're going to have to make it so that a ship like you said, the Cutlass not fly as well in atmosphere. Do you think that's going to give them a little bit of blowback? I feel like people are going to assume that their ships are just getting nerfed, so other ships are made better, rather than, oh, my ship's just getting a feature that's been planned.
I think there's a lot of balancing that needs to happen. I'm hoping that as we see atmospheric flight come into a meaningful way for the flight model, it will just change everything. It won't so much be a buff or a nerf to one ship or another ship. It will just acknowledge the physical facts of the ships that you're flying. Yeah. The Cutlass, you just need to look at the Cutlass and you see this is a flying brick with a load of guns and a load of storage, and there's two great big thrusters bolted onto it to say, here, I can do stuff. And I think the Cutlass will still be very useful at some things. So, for example, the rotating nature of those main thrusters is going to make it a lot easier to land than some other ships potentially. So I think it will all have trade-offs, and one of the things that we all need to be careful of for anybody that's playing Star Citizen right now, the game is going to change and it's going to evolve. And I think we just need to make sure that we're all aware of the fact that, even here we're talking about the ship stats of the Syulen as they are now. They might be different in a year's time or 2 years' time or 3 years' time. So I think we just need to be open to that possibility.
Yeah. And to take it one step further from what you said there, somebody might look at the Cutlass and say, well, that's not going to fly well in atmosphere. Look at the thrusters and say it probably lands well in atmosphere. But they also should be looking at the wings and say, well, somebody's going to be able to shoot through that and hit my component. Or looking at their I don't know, the where their components are and be like, well, somebody's gonna be able to get into my ship and shut it down really fast. And my point is, like, there's so many things, like you said, that are gonna come into the game to balance it, that change the game, and people assume that it's feature creep. The idea of physicalized inventories, people think that's changing the design of the game to make things more difficult or something, and it's not something that's been planned. And this is kind of off the topic, I guess, of the podcast per se, but I'm more asking how do you think it's going to go down as CIG tries to simultaneously implement things that are going to impact people's gameplay, explain to them why they're happening, and then test and polish them in a way that ends up being fun. It sounds like the whole place is going to be on fire when this kind of stuff starts coming online faster.
Oh, it's going to be an endless challenge. And the other part of that endless challenge is people love their ships. Like, people really feel a connection to their spaceships in Star Citizen. So I'm talking here, we were talking about the Cutlass Black. There are people out there that love the Cutlass. I'm not a big Drake fan. I like my cables behind like a wall or something, so I can't see them. But I can see why people would love their ships. And you saw this with the Ares Ion when that came out, and then it changed for game balancing reasons. It changed, and people were upset, and they are still upset about those changes that were made to the Ares Ion. So I think this is going to be a constant challenge that the developers will need to address. But that's not to say that we shouldn't hold back progress. And I think for the community, that's why it's so important that we're all reminding each other this stuff is going to change. If you think there is a one best ship in game today, do you know what? Great, enjoy it, but don't assume that's going to be the same tomorrow.
Yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely. And that's why when people are talking about buying ships, it's so easy to forget that we're not even playing Star Citizen. People are talking about, oh, well, I feel like they've introduced this ship and they don't know what they're doing because this ship is going to make this happen in this way. And it's like, well, there's a lot of things. We don't know what they're doing, right? We assume that they know what they're doing, but when they're adding something or when they're doing something, a lot of times that's because something might be happening in 6 months or 12 months or in 2 years. And it's not necessarily like they're just throwing blind shots at a dartboard.
And there's an element of learning as you go as well. So, I look at the recent launch of the Hull C. The Hull C launched a few months back, and it has by far more cargo storage than any other ship in game. The Hercules is the next highest. The Hull C has something like 4 or 5, even more than that actually, times the storage.
Yeah.
And so you could say that's like a game-breaking balance. And so as part of the launch of the ship, there was this new cargo mechanic that was launched just for the Hull C, which slowed down the amount of time that it took the Hull C to load. I think there's a lot of feedback around that about what works, about what doesn't work, about how that might translate to other ships or not. So I think pragmatically, like, the developers are learning through some of that as well. And whenever I watch developer interviews, whenever I watch things like Inside Star Citizen or Star Citizen Live, like, for me, there is a genuine desire on the part of most people to say, we want a balanced game. We want something where, you know, there are trade-offs between this or that, and there is a reason to take a bigger ship with a multi-crew versus a single ship. But equally, you know, they're not going to get it right first time, and that's why I think it's important to just keep talking about this stuff, keep close to the changes, and also constructively sharing the feedback about what's working and what isn't.
True. Yeah, and that's why we're all here having podcasts and streams and videos where we talk about this stuff nonstop. Somebody came on one of my streams the other week, and we were like going back and forth about a feature over and over, and they were like, "I think you're looking too deep into it," and I was like, "My man, do you know why we're here?" That's what we're all about.
I think we're all very passionate about this game. The Star Citizen community is passionate. People are passionate about their ships. People are passionate about different parts of the game. So I think it's understandable that people like to talk about it and how it is now and how it might be. And I think it's part of the fun.
Yeah. All right. Next ship, or I guess not ship, vehicle, coming in this new patch during the IAE week, I'm guessing. I don't know if it's... I know that the regular one is out. I'm not sure about the AA version, but the Tumbril Storm, which was introduced to us, I think, last summer or this summer or spring, is entering the game, and it's coming with a variant. Do you have... What do you have to say about these new tanks?
The Batmobile.
Yeah, basically.
It does look like the Batmobile from those films.
The tumbler, even the entrance, you know, aren't you like laying down in it too?
Yeah, somewhat. Yeah. I'm being cagey about my words here. I have some doubts about the Storm. I quite like the idea of a more combat-focused ground vehicle, perhaps something that's able to absorb a little bit of fire, particularly for those that are doing ground missions. It does create some kind of unique situations, and you see that with the Nova tank in game now. I think my challenge with the Storm is the badging of it as a recon tank. What are you going to go and recon that you wouldn't recon with a ship or something in orbit with a high angle telescope or something like that? I think the value of this ship is that it's a tank and it fits in more ships than a Nova. So for me, it's like a Nova light, and that is more interesting because the Nova, I think, is unparalleled in terms of being able to deploy into the ground and do some damage and blast away. And the idea of having a protected sort of ground vehicle, I get that. And I think that's how I would have badged it up. So I think rather than go down the recon tank angle, I would have said this is like a light tank. It does what the Nova does, not quite so well, but it fits in more ships, so you can bring it with you.
And I'm wondering if there's something that they have planned to make it more reasonable as recon on the ground, because I agree with you there. Like, I would think I'd either use a ship with heavy-duty equipment, or I use something really light that's not going to be detectable with a low signature, like a hover bike or something. The Storm tank sits in a weird place when it comes to recon, but I also agree with you in terms of a light tank. This thing feels like a all combat situations kind of thing. You could roll this in, especially when base building becomes a thing. When we're starting to storm bases, no pun intended, rush ground locations and just kind of hold down a force, and you don't know if that force has vehicles or infantry or ships, this thing can attack all of them because it's got a repeater on it that looks smaller than the power would imply. And you've also got inventory, which I think is huge. So you could use this thing for looting. You could potentially have this as a ship to ground base vehicle that just has a little bit extra armor, and it imposes a lot too. So like, area denial, I think, is going to be a big part of what the Storm can do. It's not something you want to attack, but it's not a huge investment like a Nova either.
Yeah, I mean, I can see that too. And tanks are fun, right? There's something to be said for that as well. Tanks are fun, and the fact that this is a more accessible tank, I think, does make it more compelling.
Now, what ships can it fit in? Because they only pointed out the Carrack on ISC, and I'm like, if y'all are trying to sell me on the ability for this thing to fit in more ships, I'm gonna need to hear more than that. I know they don't want to give us everything, but do you know of any others?
I don't, and I think this is where I would have gone down a slightly different angle with it, because I don't know if it is going to be like way more accessible than the Nova. I think it should be. I think that would create a more unique niche for this thing.
Yeah.
But they've gone down the recon tank route instead. So
Yeah, that's an interesting choice. Now, the other dimension of this tank obviously is the width, and this is I think probably people's biggest complaint about this when compared to the Nova. Obviously, they say, well, it's smaller than the Nova, but it fits the same treads. And well, before I say my part, what do you think of that? How do you feel about that argument that maybe it should be smaller in terms of actual wheelbase or tread base, I guess?
yeah, I agree. And that's because I think what would have made the Storm even more compelling is opening up the number of places it can fit into. And that I think is undermined somewhat by the width of this thing.
Yeah. I did look up on the internet, the old interwebs, how military vehicles will sit in the same sort of width because they can all ride in the tank treads, and I felt like that made sense from a logical standpoint, but gameplay wise, it does feel like it was a very significant and obvious decision that they wanted to keep it wide for balance reasons.
Yeah, but you could like future proof that, right? We're in a game that is many hundreds of years in the future. We've just been
Yeah.
talking about the Syulen and the crazy hover tech on that thing. Like, would it be so hard to believe that like you'd have a ship that would like maybe fold in on itself a little bit to store it, and then it expands out to a combat mode where the tracks are the same width? Like, you could
Yeah,
do that.
yeah, I think there are definitely things they could have done. Um,
I think the other thing about the Storm, and I haven't really got to grips with it yet, so this might be something that is an unimportant point. But when you get into the cockpit, you get these little screens that pop up, and they're like the screens that you get in the Prowler or something like that. So they aren't a window, but they're like screens that look like a window, which
Yeah.
I think is really cool. I think for a tank, that's a really good idea that you can see out without having an exposed window. But in the Storm, they've still just got a really thin sliver of view, as if you were looking through a window, but it's screens. And for me, that seems like a massive missed opportunity for a recon tank to be able to say, actually, one of the things about this tank is it's got screens all around the cockpit, so that you can actually see through the tank as if you were looking outside from anywhere in the cockpit. But instead, you've just got these 3 screens in front of you that give you a tiny little viewport. And you think, well, why didn't you just put a window in then? Or, it seems
Yeah.
like a missed opportunity there.
No, that's a good point. I'd at least love to see like the front half of your little view area be simulated like that. Because yeah, being able to see around outside, it doesn't seem like that would make too much of a difference. But yeah, it is kind of funny that you're getting the simulated view and it's still that really small little sliver of space.
Yeah, it's and I can only assume that's done to make it feel like you're looking through a tank, which makes sense. But from a technology perspective, you're going to have the screens there with the cameras pointing out and showing what's there. Just make it bigger, because that's what you would do.
Yeah, that's a good point. Is that your architect review on the tank? Should I let Morph know?
Yeah, you can let him know.
I do look forward actually to seeing what he has to say about the Syulen as well.
Spirit. I want to see the Morph Spirit video.
Yeah. The door. God, I can't wait to hear everybody's comments about the doors. The doors are funny, and I guess it's not going to matter too much in the long term because we'll be able to lock them open and they'll help with life support and all that stuff. But it's just funny how much of a thing the door conspiracy is right now.
I think it's more because it was a known complaint about the other ships, and it hasn't been resolved to the same extent for the Spirit. That's all.
Yeah, that's fair. They do love those hallways, Crusader. The Tumbril Storm's also coming with a anti-air variant. What do you think of that?
The fire all the missiles variant.
Yeah. Man, that looks cool.
It looks cool. So I actually think that these like surface to air vehicles will have a really interesting place in the game for when kind of like base building and things like that come online. I also really hope that there's a compelling reason that you would use these vehicles versus just having ship cover. So for example, maybe there's some really strategic things you can do where you can duck them in and out of, I don't know, a cave or some cover or something like that, so that you're in and out and then you're kind of withdrawn from fire. Or maybe they've got a much lower signature and can fire from like a really stealthy position. I think it's really cool. I've flown a lot of DCS World in my kind of flight hours, and I really like about DCS and the way that it models the flight sim, the fact that you've got threats in the air, but you've also got threats on the ground, and you have to take both seriously and treat the way you fly quite seriously. So I quite like that is in Star Citizen as well. I just don't know how useful it's going to be in game right now.
Yeah. That's pretty standard. That's a lot of the stuff is, I mean, we can see that it is useful. It's going to be fun for sandbox gameplay, Jump Town, probably Ghost Hollow, and things like that. I think it'll definitely be a lot of fun in places like Pyro. But right now, yeah, there's still not that many situations that bring ground and air together to make for spaceships fighting ground targets too much. We don't have the resources or the outposts or the locations to fight over. So it's kind of like the other, like the Ballista and the Centurion. They're all very cool. They're all very strong. They hold a good role, like you said, but we still don't quite have like the at least pre-prepared gameplay to make us use them.
And you don't see them very often for that reason, which is a shame.
Yeah. But the anti-air version of this, man, I think it's probably one of the cooler ground vehicles I feel like I've seen. It makes more sense to me than the original one, although the original one with the repeater it makes more sense than a cannon. But I do wonder, when can we start easily repairing stuff in the field? Because I'm not trying to refuel, or rearm. I'm not trying to load another 20 missiles into that thing when it runs out, you know?
Oh, for sure. And especially, like, I would love to see other munition types for it as well, because it's quite difficult to explain, but this looks like a tank with almost like a multi-launch rocket system on the top. So if you've seen like an MLRS, or if you've seen like the old Katyusha rockets that the Russians used to have, that sort of thing, like strapped to the back, like, it's supposed to be fantastic for performing in an anti-air role, and it looks like it would do that very well. But imagine if you had some almost like rocket artillery munitions and you were using this to attack Jump Town. You know, I think that would be cool as well.
Yeah, I think this is going to be interesting to see how people utilize it for some of these global events we have going on. The last ship that we have coming this week, I believe, is the Argo SRV. You said you haven't really gotten to use that one yet in game, but what are your thoughts on it as a ship in general and kind of what it's bringing to the game?
So I've got a couple of thoughts on it. So in terms of what it's bringing to the game, I love that the SRV has heralded the introduction of some meaningful tractor beam tech on a scale that we've not really had before. So we've got the little multi-tool thing, and you use that to move boxes around, and that's all well and good. And some people have done some quite cool stuff with that. Like I've seen people reloading and eclipse torpedoes, and that's great. the scale of the tractor beams that are coming, that the SRV heralds, I think is a big improvement to the game. You see that to some extent with the C1 Spirit, and it's got kind of that little tractor beam on it as well. But I think for a lot of ships, this is going to make quite a big difference to the quality of life sort of gameplay.
Yeah.
So the fact that the SRV is coming in, and with it, it's heralding the introduction of that meaningful next size up tractor beam gameplay, I think is very exciting, and I think it augments a lot of existing gameplay loops.
Yeah, it's kind of like you want to be excited for the SRV, but you're excited for just the feature overall.
Exactly. In terms of the SRV itself, I like the look of it. I like the Argo stuff. I've not yet had a chance to fly it. I have seen a lot of cool videos of people doing very mischievous things with an SRV. I think it's going to end up being quite a niche ship. It will have a kind of very specific use case. And I don't know how exciting it will be to fly as a daily driver, but I'm looking forward to getting some time behind the wheel and forming a more kind of measured judgment, because it does look cool.
It's cool that we can look at these ships and know they won't be popular, and know that that's not a bad thing. I've seen somebody complaining saying that they want to see more like quote unquote ugly ships in the game, and I think everyone generally gets that feeling of like, yeah, I want to see a bunch of spaceships in the game, but not the same one all the time. So you kind of want a bunch of different ships to have a bunch of different uses, and I'm glad that we have this towboat ship in the game, and that it is so specialized that when you see someone flying it, you know that like they know what they're doing. You're not just going to put anybody in a ship with a size 3 tractor beam, because what the heck are they going to do with it? Even trying this thing now in its early version, and it'll be made easier to use, but even now I can see that this is something you're going to have to train with. Not only is just figuring out how to fly with something being towed an extra step in the process of flying, but like we don't have engineering that's requiring all the maintenance of the power and components and stuff. It just definitely, it really feels like, and this is kind of going back towards what you said about tractor beams overall, the SRV is an application of something that's a game changer, in my opinion.
I agree, and that's where I hope that there's more things that would make that more meaningful, because at the moment I've got quite a narrow-minded view as to, well, like how much you can be able to do with it. But if, for example, there is new gameplay introduced where it can effectively like scan asteroids for really high quality quantanium mineable asteroids, tractor beam that and bring it to somebody in their Argo mole, that's quite interesting actually for a multi-crew operation. Or there's all those kind of things that it could do, but until you see it happen, you think it's hard to picture what it will be like.
Yeah, this is going to have an effect on every part of the game, but it's going to be slow rolling. Like I really hope the first thing they do is give us missions to tow derelict ships away from space stations, but that kind of is indicative of the idea that there's not really content made for this yet. We're hoping for the first types of missions. So it is a cool ship. It is a useful and very unique ship, but much like maybe, I guess, the Storm AA, there might not be a ton of useful uses for it right now outside of sandbox gameplay.
I mean, I think time will tell. Like, it's difficult to know until you actually see. And I think there will be some people that do some very cool things with this ship. You were talking there about dragging stuff away from space stations for a contract. Equally, you could say there's some use in dragging loads and loads of salvage ships together and then working with a salvager to break those down. So
yep.
I think people will do some very interesting things with this ship. I just don't know that it would be a daily driver for a lot of people.
Oh yeah, daily driver, absolutely not. Yeah, I think it'll be. I love the vehicle tractor beams. I'm excited to see how they are used, just like you were saying. Hopefully CIG gives us the tools to facilitate some interesting like joint operations with that. Were there any other ships that I had missed that we know about? I think I hit everything that was in Inside Star Citizen.
I think you've hit everything, albeit we might find that by the time this goes out, there have been more announcements.
Yes. And in our future episodes over the next couple weeks, we'll have more news coming from all these ship stuff throughout this big event in Star Citizen. But Farrister, before we finish things up, any other ships that you have your eye on that might be coming soon or that they've announced for next year that you're excited about?
Honestly, I've been waiting for the Spirit, and that's been the ship that I've had my eye on probably for most of this year. So I'm just excited to be able to fly that, to get some time behind the wheel. So
Cool.
that's my immediate future, and it is now.
Yeah, same here, and I'm liking it. All right, man. Let everybody know where they could find your own content on YouTube or anywhere else on the internet.
Well, hopefully just on YouTube. I'm hoping it's not leaked out elsewhere on the internet. But yeah, youtube.com/Farrister. I do a lot of videos these days around ships. I show some actual Star Citizen gameplay with some voiceover work. And also from time to time, I go out and visit the different sites that there are to see in Star Citizen and see the cool locations. So Farrister on YouTube.
And it's good stuff. Make sure to check that out, folks. It'll be in the show notes down below if you didn't hear it. And thanks for coming to another episode of the Launch Sequence. Always a good time getting to talk about Star Citizen or we do talk about other space games occasionally. It's just, it's a lot going on with Star Citizen. But it's always great bringing in another guest, especially somebody who's been here before like Farrister. And I've had a lovely talk, man. Thanks for joining me.
Likewise. Thank you for the invite. Enjoyed it.
Of course. Folks, you can find this podcast ad-free on audio platforms. YouTube likes their ads and stuff. So if you're looking for a less interrupted experience, I'd check that out. But also, if you are a supporter on Patreon, YouTube, Ko-fi, or Twitch, you can join us live as some people are here doing. And check out the conversation beforehand, afterhand, ask some questions maybe, and even get a couple of exclusive episodes of the podcast. So consider supporting. It helps us a ton, goes a long way. And thank you all for coming to another week. I'll see you in the next one.